December 1944. The Ardennes forest. A German machine gun nest commander peers through the dense fog of a Belgian winter morning, watching something that makes his blood run cold. Not tanks, not artillery, not bombers. Jeeps, dozens of them, swarming across the battlefield like mechanical hornets, appearing from nowhere, disappearing into the mist, carrying supplies, towing artillery, evacuating wounded, mounting machine guns, cutting through terrain that should be impossible. One moment they're gone. The next, they're behind your lines. He turns to his second-in-command and mutters words that would be recorded in his journal days later. "We've been fighting the wrong enemy. We should have been shooting at those damned little trucks." This is the story of how a vehicle designed in just 49 days became the weapon that terrified the Wehrmacht more than any tank America ever built. When World War II erupted, the German military had a secret weapon that wasn't a weapon at all. It was speed. The Blitzkrieg relied on rapid movement, mechanized infantry, coordinated assault. They had carefully engineered vehicles, tracked motorcycles, specialized transport. Every piece of equipment had been designed with Prussian precision over years of development. The Americans had cars. In 1940, as Europe burned, the U.S. Army was still using commercial vehicles bought from Ford and Dodge. Trucks that got stuck in mud. Staff cars that couldn't navigate rough terrain. Supply lines that moved at a crawl. The American military desperately needed something that could go anywhere, carry anything, and keep up with modern warfare. They needed it fast. The specifications seemed impossible. A reconnaissance vehicle that weighed under 1,300 pounds could carry a crew of 3, mount a machine gun, travel at 50 miles per hour, and navigate terrain that would stop a conventional vehicle cold. Oh, and climb a 60-degree slope, and ford 18-inch deep water, and operate with minimal maintenance under combat conditions. The Army sent the requirements to 135 American automobile manufacturers. Only 2 responded. One of them was a small company in Toledo, Ohio, called Willys Overland Motors. They were nearly bankrupt, producing passenger cars nobody wanted. They had 49 days to build a prototype or lose the contract. Most engineers said it couldn't be done. Delmar Barney Roos didn't care what most engineers said. The 49-year-old chief engineer at Willys had come up through the old school of American manufacturing. Born in Brooklyn, raised on taking things apart and putting them back together better. He'd worked for Studebaker, Marmon, Pierce Arrow. He'd designed engines that won the Indianapolis 500. When Willys hired him in 1938, they were drowning in debt and outdated designs. He'd spent 2 years trying to save the company with conventional thinking. Nothing worked. Then the Army contract landed on his desk. Roos saw something everyone else missed. This wasn't about building a new car. This was about rethinking what a vehicle could be. Strip away everything unnecessary. Make every component serve multiple purposes. Build it light enough to be air-portable, but tough enough to survive combat. Make it simple enough that a farm kid could fix it with a wrench and wire. He assembled a team of 17 engineers. They had 7 weeks. They worked in shifts around the clock. Roos slept in his office, existing on coffee and cigarettes, sketching designs on any surface he could find. His team called him a madman. He called them soft. The prototype rolled out on November 11th, 1940. It weighed 2,160 pounds, 860 pounds over the Army's limit. The Army rejected it. Roos went back to the drawing board. Lighter frame, thinner body panels, smaller engine, redesign the engine entirely. Make it more powerful but lighter. Hollow out every component that didn't need to be solid. Use aluminum where possible. Eliminate redundancy. 3 months later, Willys delivered a second prototype. It weighed 2,450 pounds. But it could do things the Army's own engineers said were impossible. It climbed slopes that should have flipped it backward. It forded streams up to its hood. It carried twice its rated load without complaint. The engine, Roos's masterpiece, produced 60 horsepower from just 134 cubic inches, more power per pound than anything in production. The Army ordered 16,000 units. By war's end, that number would exceed 640,000. The Germans would come to call it Gefährliches Kleines Fahrzeug, the dangerous little vehicle. North Africa, 1942. This is where German forces first encountered the Jeep in significant numbers, and they couldn't understand what they were seeing. American supply lines moved at impossible speeds. Ammunition arrived at the front before radio requests were acknowledged. Wounded soldiers evacuated from positions that should have been unreachable. Reconnaissance patrols that appeared, vanished, and reappeared miles away in minutes. A captured German lieutenant, interrogated after the Battle of Kasserine Pass, described his confusion. "Your trucks are everywhere. They climb mountains. They cross wadis. We mine roads, and they drive around the mines through the desert. We shell supply routes, and the supplies still arrive. How many of these vehicles do you have?" The answer was simple and terrifying. Enough. Because the Jeep wasn't just one vehicle. It was an entire military logistics revolution packaged in 2,450 pounds of steel, aluminum, and canvas. Need to move infantry quickly? A Jeep carried 5 soldiers plus gear, traveling cross-country at speeds that matched roads. Need a weapons platform? Mount a 30 caliber Browning on the hood, or a 50 caliber on a pintle behind the passenger seat. Some units mounted bazookas, others fitted recoilless rifles. The British Special Air Service welded twin Vickers K-guns on the back and turned Jeeps into desert raiders that terrorized German supply convoys. Need artillery support? A Jeep could tow a 37mm anti-tank gun, a 105mm howitzer, or even, in desperate circumstances, a 155mm field piece. They became mobile artillery platforms that could shoot, scoot, and survive. Need reconnaissance? The Jeep's low profile and speed made it nearly impossible to track. They'd scout enemy positions, mark coordinates, and fade back into the landscape before German forces could respond. Need medical evacuation? Strap litter carriers on the hood and sides. 4 wounded could be transported at once, across terrain that would stop an ambulance cold. Need wire laying for communications? Jeeps ran telephone lines across battlefields under fire, unspooling wire from special brackets as they drove. The Germans had specialized vehicles for each of these tasks. The Americans had the Jeep. But it was the simplicity that made German commanders truly nervous. A Jeep had 4,000 parts. A German Kubelwagen, their rough equivalent, had over 6,000. The Jeep's engine was so simple a soldier with basic mechanical knowledge could perform a complete teardown and rebuild in 2 hours using tools that fit in a small box. Every 5th Jeep in a column carried spare parts that could repair the other 4. German vehicles required specialized mechanics, specific tools, parts manufactured to tight tolerances in factories back in the fatherland. When a Kubelwagen broke down in Russia or France or Italy, it often stayed broken. Supply lines for German vehicles stretched thousands of miles and were under constant attack. Jeeps were repaired with baling wire, scrap metal, and American ingenuity. A Wehrmacht quartermaster captured in Italy had his personal journal translated. One entry from September 1943 read, "Watched American mechanics work on their damaged vehicles today. They cannibalized 3 wrecked trucks to build 2 working ones in under 4 hours. Used parts that were not designed for those vehicles. Everything still functioned. Our mechanics would report this as impossible. The Americans simply do not care what the manual says." This was the real secret weapon. Not just the Jeep's capabilities, but its philosophy. It represented a completely different approach to warfare. German military doctrine emphasized specialized equipment, rigid protocols, specific tools for specific jobs. The Blitzkrieg worked because every component was precisely engineered to work together in a predetermined way. The American approach was chaos and adaptation. The Jeep could do anything because it was designed to do everything poorly enough that a creative soldier could make it work. The realization hit German forces hardest during the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler's desperate winter offensive in December 1944 was designed to split the Allied forces, capture Antwerp, and change the course of the war. The plan relied on speed, surprise, and the assumption that winter weather in the Ardennes would ground Allied aircraft and slow American armor. The Germans didn't account for the Jeeps. Major Ludwig Schneider commanded a panzer reconnaissance battalion during the opening days of the offensive. His unit's job was to identify American positions, locate weak points, and report back to main attack forces. Fast, hit-and-run operations. The kind of mission German forces had perfected in 1940. On the second day of the battle, Schneider's column encountered something that changed his understanding of the war. American Jeeps operating in the worst conditions imaginable. Fog so thick you couldn't see 50 meters. Roads covered in ice and snow. Temperatures below freezing. Terrain that should have made movement nearly impossible. The Jeeps didn't care. Schneider's after-action report, captured weeks later when his unit surrendered, described what happened. We attempted to encircle what we believed to be a retreating American supply unit. Multiple four-wheeled vehicles moving east away from our advance. We had superior numbers and better position. The encirclement should have been textbook. The American vehicles did not retreat on the road. They left the road. All of them simultaneously, as though coordinated by radio, though we detected no transmissions. They drove directly into the forest. Not slowly, as one would expect in such terrain, but at combat speed. We pursued on the road, believing we would overtake them at the next intersection. They were not at the next intersection. We sent motorcycle scouts into the forest. The scouts reported finding tracks, but could not follow them through the dense undergrowth. 30 minutes later, artillery began falling on our column. Accurate fire, adjusted rapidly. The spotters were the vehicles we had trapped. They had driven through impassable terrain, climbed hills our own reconnaissance vehicles could not manage, and established observation positions behind our advance. We lost 3 trucks and a half-track before we could withdraw. I reported to command that the Americans possessed all-terrain vehicles with capabilities exceeding our intelligence estimates. Command told me I was making excuses. I was not making excuses. I was trying to explain that we were fighting an enemy who did not follow the rules we understood. This pattern repeated across the Ardennes. German forces would identify American units, plan encirclements, execute what should have been crushing attacks. The Americans would vanish. Not retreat, vanish. Their vehicles would take paths that German military doctrine said were impossible, reappearing in positions that shouldn't have been accessible. The Jeeps were rewriting the map. One captured German operations officer explained it in his interrogation. Your maps and our maps show the same roads, the same terrain. But for your Jeeps, there are roads everywhere. Every trail becomes a supply route. Every field becomes a parking area. Every forest becomes a highway. You do not need roads. We have no doctrine for this. The psychological impact was enormous. German soldiers, trained to think in terms of positions, lines, secure flanks, suddenly faced an enemy that existed everywhere simultaneously. Supply dumps deep in friendly territory were not safe. Jeep-mounted raiders could strike and disappear. Communication lines could not be secured. Jeeps carrying wire-cutting teams appeared from nowhere. Reserves could not be hidden. American reconnaissance Jeeps found every concentration of forces. The fear wasn't of the Jeeps' firepower. A .30 caliber machine gun was not particularly terrifying to soldiers who'd faced Soviet tanks and American artillery. The fear was of never knowing where the Americans were, of realizing that the small vehicle you glimpsed 3 kilometers away might be calling in an airstrike on your position, of understanding that the Americans could move faster, respond quicker, and be everywhere you weren't. General der Panzertruppe Hasso von Manteuffel, commander of the 5th Panzer Army during the Bulge, wrote in his memoirs, "We planned for American armor. We prepared for American infantry. We underestimated American mobility. Their small reconnaissance vehicles were more dangerous than their tanks because we could not predict where they would be. A tank must follow terrain. These jeeps followed intention." When the Battle of the Bulge ended in Allied victory, German forces retreated across the Rhine, and American forces captured thousands of enemy soldiers. The interrogations revealed something unexpected. German soldiers weren't talking about Sherman tanks or P-51 Mustangs. They were talking about jeeps. A survey conducted by U.S. Army intelligence in March 1945 asked captured German officers what American weapons they found most effective. The expected answers would have been heavy bombers, artillery, or tanks. The most common answer was the light 4-wheel vehicle. One captured Wehrmacht captain explained, "Your tanks, we could fight. Your artillery, we could survive in proper positions. Your aircraft, we could hide from or defend against. But your little trucks were everywhere. They were your eyes. They were your supply lines. They were your command posts. They were your ambulances. Destroy one, and 3 more appeared. We could not stop them because we could not find them all." Even more revealing were the vehicles German forces chose to use themselves. As the war progressed and German equipment broke down or was destroyed, captured jeeps became prized possessions. Wehrmacht units would strip German markings, paint their own insignia on American jeeps, and use them in preference to their own vehicles. SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny, famous for daring commando operations, specifically requested captured jeeps for his operations. During the Battle of the Bulge, his English-speaking commandos used jeeps in false flag operations behind American lines. Not because they were similar to German vehicles, but because even German special forces recognized the jeep's superiority for hit-and-run operations. The ultimate vindication came from an unexpected source. After the war, as the Allies examined captured German documents and plans, they found multiple Wehrmacht reports and memorandums discussing the need to develop a German equivalent to the Jeep. The vehicle they were desperately trying to copy in 1944 and 1945 was a design that had been cobbled together in 49 days back in 1940 by a nearly bankrupt American company. The British Army loved their Jeeps so much they tried to keep every single one after the war, leading to diplomatic disputes about Lend-Lease equipment returns. The Soviet Red Army, not known for praising American equipment, specifically requested as many Jeeps as possible and developed their own copy, the Gaz-67, based on captured examples. The French resistance reported that a working Jeep was worth more than almost any other military equipment because it could transport fighters, weapons, and supplies quickly enough to avoid German patrols. One resistance leader wrote, "A Jeep was freedom. It meant you could fight and escape, fight and return. The Germans had better weapons, but we had speed." But here's what makes the Jeep story truly significant. It wasn't supposed to change warfare. It was just supposed to be a cheap, simple, light reconnaissance vehicle. The military theorists and generals didn't understand what they'd created. They wanted a replacement for motorcycles and horses. What they got was a revolution in military thinking. The Jeep proved that versatility beats specialization, that simplicity enables innovation, that giving frontline soldiers a tool and trusting them to figure out how to use it is more effective than giving them specialized equipment with a manual. Every military vehicle since 1945 has been influenced by the Jeep. The Humvee, the Land Rover, the Toyota Land Cruiser. They all trace their lineage back to those 49 days when Barney Roos and his team tried to build something light enough to carry but tough enough to survive combat. The Jeep changed how we think about logistics. Modern military doctrine about rapid deployment, flexible supply lines, and all-terrain mobility all started with that small vehicle that German soldiers learned to fear. General George Marshall, U.S. Army Chief of Staff during World War II, said the Jeep was America's greatest contribution to modern warfare. Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox himself, reportedly told his staff after repeated encounters with British SAS Jeep raiders in North Africa, "If I could have 2,000 of those American vehicles, I would conquer any position." But perhaps the most telling assessment came from that German machine gun commander in the Ardennes, the one who watched Jeeps swarm across the battlefield that foggy December morning. His journal, found after the war, contained a final entry from April 1945, just before his unit surrendered. "We were better soldiers. We had better training. We had better weapons. They had better trucks." In the end, wars are not won by soldiers or weapons. They are won by supplies that arrive, by wounded who are saved, by commanders who can move, by reconnaissance that finds the enemy. They are won by little trucks that go everywhere and do everything. We lost to the Jeep. That's the real secret weapon. Not the technology itself, but the philosophy behind it. The understanding that warfare is about logistics, communication, and adaptation more than firepower. That giving your forces the ability to be anywhere, anytime, doing anything they need to do, is more valuable than giving them the most powerful weapon. The Jeep was designed in 49 days by a nearly bankrupt company desperate for a military contract. It became the vehicle that terrified the Wehrmacht, revolutionized military logistics, and changed how we think about modern warfare. All because a few engineers in Toledo, Ohio, decided that sometimes the best solution is the simplest one. Build it light. Make it tough. Let the soldiers figure out the rest. The Germans called it the dangerous little vehicle. The Americans called it a Jeep. History calls it one of the most important military innovations of the 20th century. And it all started because nobody told Barney Roos that what he was trying to do was impossible. He was too busy building it to care about the rules.